We're excited tonight to present Showtime's Power Hour on virtual interviews. Our presenter this evening is someone who is no stranger to the stage, but like many of us, relatively new to the virtual world of communication. Nancy Starr Cassidy has been a member of Toastmasters International for more than 30 years. In that time, she has earned numerous educational awards, including the Distinguished Toastmaster, not once, not twice, but multiple times. Okay. She has also taken full advantage of the leadership opportunities in the organization and served 2 years on the International Board of Directors. She has received a presidential citation for her continuing leadership efforts within the organization. In the real world, Nancy recently retired, doggone her, from the third largest public utility in the nation, serving in roles in IT, procurement, and HR. Please give a round of jazz hands to our presenter, Nancy, as she introduces you to virtual interviews. Woohoo!
Thank you, Trish. It is a delight to be able to participate in the Showtime Power Hour. I'm so grateful to see so many familiar faces and several new faces. And I'm very excited to talk about what's different in the virtual interview world. During this presentation, I will be taking several breaks for questions, but should you have questions or comment, please take advantage of the chat session, and the marvelous moderator, Bobby O'Connell, will be helping me to monitor the chat and will identify those during the question and answer period to be able to participate. Also serving in a very important role is our Zoom master host, the amazing Trish Blackwelder. If you have any technical questions or how do I raise my hand, how do I get to the chat, then please direct those questions to her. I appreciate both of your assistance today. Let me begin this session by sharing a story with you. This was early in my career. I had already worked about 5 years in the retail industry, and I had spent 2 years in property management in a hiring and firing role. An opportunity came to my attention that was going to have much more responsibility and greater benefits. Boy, was I excited for this interview. I dressed to the nines, I walked into the interview room, and then I paused because there wasn't just one interviewer, there were 4. I had never participated in a panel interview before, and it really threw me off. I couldn't tell who the person was that was in charge, and I couldn't tell who was the person that I really needed to connect with. So my attention was divided. And then suddenly, one of the panelists started challenging some of my responses. And I will tell you, it rattled me to the core. It got to the point where all I wanted to do was just leave the room. Forget my dreams of moving up into the world. I had blown it. So what did that do for me? Well, let me tell you, I still remember, and I'm probably turning a little pink at that embarrassment. So the first thing I vowed to do was to finish my college degree, because I decided that I was so humiliated, I didn't even want to be in the property management business anymore. But the most important thing it did for me was I vowed I would never be unprepared for an interview again. If I didn't get the job, it was going to be because I wasn't the right fit, not that I blew the interview. So thus began my interest in pursuing great interview experiences. And over my career, I have interviewed hundreds of individuals, both as a hiring manager, being part of a panel. I've interviewed from entry-level jobs to executives, and I have served on a number of selection panels, both in a professional capacity and for nonprofits. So I have a long list of stories of things you could do poorly and things you could do better. But this session is not just about interviewing, it's about how to be successful in a virtual interview. So let me begin by sharing my screen. And share. Excellent. So what is different about a virtual interview? Well, pretty much everything. The job market today is completely different from 6 months ago. One of the main reasons for this huge change is just the sheer volume of jobless workers who are applying for scarce openings. Another strange phenomenon is that employers are suddenly having to hire for positions that they may never have had before. And certainly everyone's job description has changed, as now we're interested in hiring remote workers and people who are just have different skill set perhaps than what we were looking for just a few months ago. I talked to a number of hiring managers. I've done a lot of reading on the topic, and it is painful on both sides of the screen. But what are some of the common themes that I've been hearing? Everyone has got to be more flexible, agile, and technologically efficient. So what does that mean for your interview? How can you demonstrate that you are flexible, agile, and more technologically efficient? Well, let's talk about what that might mean. So you're scheduled for an interview. What's different? There are some positives and there are some negatives. Let's talk about some of the disadvantages. In the old days, we used to be able to drive to a location. We would arrive, hopefully, at least 15 minutes early, and you would get a sense of the corporation by just driving up to the building, walking in the rooms, getting a sense of their decor. You could get a sense of what the people look like, how they're dressed. You get a very strong sense of the corporate culture just by physically walking into the building. And guess what? You no longer have that preview before your interview on getting to know a little bit about the corporate culture. One of the other challenges is creating a connection. You got to be looking at that little white dot there. And there's so many other distractions going on. Can you be sure that you're creating that connection with the interviewers? And what if there are multiple interviewers? One of the advantages, of course, if you're looking at the camera, they all think you're looking at them. But still, it's a little more challenging to be able to create that connection. Now, this is the part of the research that I found really interesting. Answers must be shorter. When we are working in a virtual meeting space, we don't have the ability to daydream and create our short shopping lists and do some of the other things we used to do when our minds would wander during a meeting. No, we are all upfront and present, and everybody can see everything you're doing. And so what's happened is the attention span needs to be a little bit shorter. So where before you might have felt comfortable telling a 2 to 3 minute story to give an example behind your skill, experts are recommending that you compress your answers down to 90 seconds, 2 minutes at the most. And that can be a challenge, especially if there's anyone here that's not a Toastmaster. If you are a Toastmaster, you've got that advantage of knowing a 1 to 2 time frame from our table topics experience. But for the average person, and especially if nerves are running amok, it's hard to tell when that 1.5 to 2 minutes is over. And lastly, as I mentioned, you can't hide anything. If I'm down here jiggling my foot, nervousness, guess what? That's showing up on the screen. If I'm playing with my jewelry or petting my cat, people will know. So you just have to be aware that you can't hide anything. Now, there's also some positives to virtual interviews. Decisions are being made much more quickly. The time from the hiring manager reviewing your resume to the time that they place the call, schedule it, and make the decision to hire is highly compressed. And so that is a positive, that you will get to the interview generally more quickly, and you will certainly hear the results a lot more quickly. Pardon me. Okay, there we go. And then it's also easier to see the reactions. So when you are talking to someone, you might get a little bit better sense from the person if you are hitting the mark with your answers, or at least you'll be able to see if there's confusion on their face just a little more evidently, because again, we're all closer even though we're actually further apart. But here is the most important thing about virtual interviews. You control the environment. You don't get to do that when you go to the big fancy office or the sterile conference room. No, you are creating the interview space. This right here is within your control. So that is a large part of what we're going to be focusing on today, is how to control your environment. So we are going to discuss that in 3 different ways. We're going to talk about setting your stage. This is your stage. We're going to talk about making a great first impression. And we're going to talk about the importance of leaving a lasting impression. Now, before we go on to that content, I want to take a moment just to see if there are any questions from the group.
I think we're looking good in the chat, Nancy.
Excellent. Well, then I am pleased to carry on. But before I do start my slideshow again, let me ask you all a question. As you're thinking about either your last interview or an upcoming interview, how important is this interview to you? How important is the outcome of this interview to you? That is the #1 question that you have to ask yourself. And let me explain why. If the interview is this important, then the effort that you need to put in to prepare for the interview darn well better match that. So ask yourself, how important is this interview? And am I willing to put in a little effort to let the people who are interviewing me know that it's important to me? So that's the framework from which I'm approaching the rest of this session. So let me resume my slideshow. So we're going to talk about the first point, which is setting the stage. So the setting the stage, as I mentioned, is this frame right here. And there are several things that you can do to ensure that your stage is set to your best advantage. Because as I mentioned, this is the first time where you get to control your environment. The virtual interview is happening on a platform. Now, we all know Zoom is incredibly popular, but there are other platforms. Some businesses use Skype, some Microsoft Teams. I've heard of a few others. I have to admit, I've not personally experienced those. So the number one thing you need to do is you need to make sure you've downloaded all those applications and that you have tested them on your computer, and that you know how each of the applications, especially the one they're going to be using for the interview, works for your area, because they all frame differently. They all have similar functionality, but of course the controls are going to be in different places. So folks, you better do that. You better know where the mute button is. If you need to cough, then just say, "Pardon me," press that mute button, cough, and then make sure you turn the button back on, and then you will continue. So you don't want to be fumbling around with the technology. And why is that? Because when we were discussing earlier, it's so important that you appear to be technologically efficient. So if you are having trouble manipulating your platform for the interview, they're going to question just how technologically efficient you are with the rest of the applications on your computing device. So please make sure that you know how to do that. Know how to share the screen, because again, in some interviews, you're required to show some of your work. So if that's the case, you want to be prepared and feel comfortable with screen sharing. And you also want to be comfortable with switching between gallery view and speaker view if you're interviewing with a panel. You want to be able to see everyone's reaction and know how you are coming across. So that's why getting to know your technology is probably the first and most important part of being able to set the stage. Now let's talk about your camera setup. And I know my good friend Bobby O'Connell did a session here on mastering your virtual presence, and I'm sure there's 1,000 other clips available on YouTube that will share with you how to set your space. But let me reassure you, you can't be too careful here. You don't know what is going to distract your interviewing panel from focusing on you. So as you can see in my situation, I have tried to keep a very neutral background here. I do have a few items of interest, so it doesn't look like I'm in a sterile room, but I can tell you one of my fellow club members had pointed out to me this cute little table I have back here was full of clutter and it was very distracting. So I was glad, because then I was able to grab a bin and just sweep everything in there and get it neatly out of place when it is important that you want people focusing on you. So that's why the technology is so important. If lighting is not good, then invest in a different type of portable light, a ring light, something. Grab a lamp out of one of your other rooms. Set the stage so that you are being shown truly in the best light. And if I see one more distracting ceiling fan in a window, I'm going to scream. So again, remove the distractions. So be highly critical about what you look like. Figure out whether to raise your laptop or computing device, whatever it is you're going to be using, and just make sure that you're very comfortable with that. Now, let me also share with you, we all had Trish explaining to us to rename our space for those of us that are Showtime members. Please pay attention to what your screen name is. Make sure that that name is a professional name, because again, these are the people that are making decisions about you. And if you have some crazy cute nickname on there and that is not what you want your hiring manager to see, pay attention to those kinds of details. And of course, you want to close all other applications, shut off your phones, do all those things to create a distraction-free zone. And folks, if you have roommates or other people, then you need to post a big sign, interview in process. So really taking a little bit of effort to make sure that the dogs and cats are not jumping on your lap, kids aren't interrupting, whatever you need to do to create that distraction-free zone. And let's talk a moment about backgrounds, shall we? I've seen backgrounds done well, but I've seen many not done well. If you are comfortable with the technology, you know that you never have problems with bandwidth and that you don't have to worry about your hair appearing and disappearing and your ears appearing and disappearing, then that's fine. But I will tell you, I will not use backgrounds except in a social environment, because it's one more thing that is just distracting you from appearing to be professional. And speaking of appearing to be professional, we should all know by now that we need to dress for success. Now, in this new casual virtual world, does it require a suit and tie anymore? Probably not. There may be a few industries where that's still the standard, because people are concerned about how you're going to present yourself to their clients. But generally, in a virtual interview, business casual or better. Now, personally, I'm in huge favor of throwing a light jacket on. It just adds another level of professionalism and can still be quite comfortable for a virtual environment. Let me give you one word of caution. You'll notice that these business casual samples both have button-down tops. If you're like me and have gained a few pandemic pounds, buttons are not your friend. We do not want to have any wardrobe malfunctions during your interview. So again, dressed comfortably, but professionally. If there's a question about it being a little snug, then opt for a different outfit. So hopefully that will solve that problem. Before we go on to make a great first impression, I would be happy to see if we have any questions.
Yes, there've been a couple of things come through. First, is it best to have a natural room versus an image? That came in, I believe, when you were talking about the backgrounds.
Right, and again, everyone is going to be different. For me, a natural background, again, says something about you. So it lets you know something, it introduces you in a way because you're setting the stage. But if you just don't have an area of your house that's clutter-free, or a place that is a neutral area, again, you can use a background if you know your bandwidth is going to support it, if you are comfortable with the background, etc.
Okay. And a question came in from Nikki, the same one I asked before we got started. How do you stop the reflection of your glasses? Any tips for that?
It is, and I've even paid the extra money for the professional non-glare, but you can see that if I tilt my head back, my ring light reflects. So you have to either move the light so that it is slightly above, or you have to move yourself so that you're not getting the light directly in your face. So it takes some experiment, and that's why I run many a Zoom session where I'm the only participant and I'm moving my laptop all over the room so I can find the correct place. So just because you work from your desk doesn't mean that that's where you have to interview from. You know, feel free to turn it around or do something. And folks, please don't ever let me see the bed in either your master bedroom or guest room, whatever one you're doing, that is just does not leave a good impression for your hiring manager. They just do not want to be thinking about that.
Okay. So we also got a tip from Cynthia Kerford. She suggests that we don't announce that you're new to technology or an application. So,
That is true. You don't want to point out that. And so that's why practice is important. If you've never used, if they said they're going to use Microsoft Teams for the interview, then download it and practice with it so that you can act like you know exactly what you're doing when the time comes to use it.
okay. And I'm seeing some more feedback too about the situation with eyeglasses. People are suggesting tilting. Some people have a display that can be tilted, or ordering new glasses with a smaller lens size so that there's less real estate for the light to reflect. And then there was one person who said, can we ask the audience which ones they think are busy in our season? Cynthia, I'm not quite sure what you meant by that. Would you unmute real quick? And
absolutely. If everyone was to quickly take a look at everyone's background and determine whose background looks semi-professional and whose looks too busy to be distracting, that could be a lead for us to help neutralize the situation. I love Trisha's background, so I'm going to be, if I'm not from Arizona, I want to see what that looks like in my case. So that's what I'm suggesting. If everyone was to just take a look, and if Nancy would do a quick around the world of like, don't like, suggestions or quickly, that's what I'm suggesting. That's all. Thank you.
Great. We don't want to point out anyone, and please don't say, oh my gosh, Nancy, I hate that lamp. Please don't ever use that lamp. So, but yes, that would be helpful. And I'm not sure the best way to handle that, Bobby. Do we want to do that via chat or?
yeah, we could do that. So if you want to, send me a private chat perhaps of whose backgrounds you like or don't like.
Great. And then we could maybe do a little bit of a summary later.
Yeah.
Excellent. Thanks for the suggestion.
And I think we're good to move on then, Nancy. Thank you.
All right. Excellent. Let me return back to talking about how do you make a great first impression? Well, let me fill you in on a secret. The first impression starts long before the interview starts. Remember when I was talking about that level of preparedness? This is what I'm talking about. Now that you have set your stage and done all that, we need to make sure that you are actually prepared for this interview. Now, some of these tips are universal, whether you're meeting in person or virtually, but they're very important. And so I'm going to re-emphasize those. You should research the company or the department if you're moving internally that is doing the hiring, because the more you know about the company, the less time the hiring manager has to spend telling you about the company. So doing your research shows them that you are interested and ready to come to work for them. So take advantage of whatever information you can use, research tools, insider information, and be able to get to know as much as you can about that company or the type of work as you can before you ever even enter the room. Also, having learned from the painful experience, if you can find out in advance, will you be interviewing one-on-one or will this be a panel interview? Several of the articles that I read from executives said that their hiring processes have completely changed. And because they have to expedite bringing so many new people on board, that they are not using panel interviews where normally they would, or vice versa sometimes, because now it's so easy to get multiple people in a room together that sometimes now there are more people interviewing than would generally be the case. So anytime you can know ahead of time, but again, remember that rule I said about being agile and flexible. Don't be shocked if you are expecting a panel and you end up with one, or vice versa. So that's another way to just be psychologically prepared. I always recommend to have a notepad handy with a pen, because you never know when it's important to write something down. So have that easily accessible to you. So that's all part of setting up your stage, making sure that you're not having to fumble for a pen or a piece of paper if called upon to do so. And this is something incredibly important. Confirm the date, time, and time zone. I just hear too many horror stories of people who logged in an hour after their interview time, or sometimes even worse, that you log in an hour ahead of time only to interrupt an interview of another candidate. So it's critically important that you take the time to confirm those time zones, especially for us in Arizona, where our time zone tends to confuse a lot of people. So how else can we be prepared? We need to make sure that you know the most commonly asked questions that are going to be coming to you. Now, I know some of you in this discussion participation group here are very experienced at this, and you can probably predict what questions are going to be asked. But times are changing. And remember that even if you are asked a situational question, give me an example of a time when you had to blah, 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 you now have to compress your story down. So you need to not only have a story ready, but be able to compress the story to get the key components to you before, to the interviewer, before that 90-second attention span is up. Because the last thing you want to do is overuse your time for one particular question. Now, here is where I am happy to share a resource that I found. I have a copy of the interview prep sheet. It's the 30 most top questions to know before your interview. And that is brought to you by careersidekick.com. And that resource I will be making available to you. It will give you several situational questions and some bonus questions for helping to prepare for your interview. And that way you can give those thoughts to these kinds of questions in advance and not be taken by surprise by one of those situational questions. So the day of the interview, what else do you need to make this good first impression? As I mentioned, clear the clutter. Now, most of the clutter on the screen is outside the view of the camera, but you just want to make sure that you are reducing the opportunity to accidentally knock over a cup, etc. And speaking of the cup, be careful about too much caffeine. As a matter of fact, my recommendation is you should have a beverage nearby in case you get a little dry, you need to clear your throat, but it should be water, not something carbonated or caffeinated. So that is something to give consideration to. You should eat lightly and hydrate before the meeting. That will help some of the dry mouth syndrome or any congestion or headaches or things that'll distract you from being the sharpest that you can possibly be during that interview. As I mentioned, in this case, an interviewer should not sign in very early. You should sign in about 3 minutes before the allocated time. Why? Because someone might be using the same Zoom session for all of the interviews, and they've allocated 15 minutes or so, and the previous interview might be running long. So the experts say just wait till about 3 minutes before the allocated time to sign in. So that's why, remember, you've already tested all your software and you're ready to go. So a 3-minute window should be plenty. When you do connect, please be sure to share your phone number with the interviewing candidates, just in case there is some kind of technology glitch. And that way you can continue the interview by phone rather than having a clumsy and awkward having to reschedule the interview. So I always like to have that information available to you. But I have one other important tip for you just before you make that important phone call or you start that Zoom meeting session. And that is the importance of the power pose. Now, some of you are probably already familiar with Amy Cuddy and her famous TED Talk about power posing. That was back in 2012. And I'll tell you, it changed my world. For those of you that are Toastmasters and you have to get out on that big stage, the concept of making yourself really big for 2 minutes before you walk on that stage or into the interview room really does a lot to boost your confidence. Now, I will tell you that there is a bit of a disclaimer. There was a lot of controversy about this and its scientific authenticity. And for about 4 years, there was a lot of controversy about whether the whole concept of power pose works. However, they did scientifically authenticate the fact that both power posing does work, but most importantly, being withdrawn or closed in has a more negative effect than anything else. So take that minute. And as a matter of fact, we're going to stretch now because you've all been listening to me for a moment. Whether you feel comfortable standing or you just want to do it here in your chair, I want you to make yourself big. Just feel big. Roar if you want to, as long as your microphone is off. But just stretch, stretch, stretch. I went to yoga this morning, so I feel extra stretchy right now. So do that power pose. Now, they recommend that you do it for a full 2 minutes, which could be awkward. But for those of you that are comfortable and relaxing, just that few moments of putting your hands on your hip, doing a Wonder Woman pose, makes you just open up and feel more energetic. And trust me, the people on this other side of the screen are going to feel that. So that just helps keep a more positive energy in the room. So we want to make sure you just give it a try. What harm can it do? And at that point, I think I'm ready for some questions. I know I see a lot of chat activity. I didn't know if people were ready for questions.
Yes, one question came in. Could you please give some tips for dealing with unprofessional interviewers or hiring managers, whether virtual or not virtual?
Oh my, I could write a book. So I'll tell you what, it all has to do with respect and what I call that 30 seconds of awkwardness. If something happens, the interviewer or the interviewee's behavior, question perhaps is something uncomfortable, it is so much better to just take a breath and say, excuse me, I need to share with you that I'm feeling uncomfortable at this moment, and I'm hoping I can enlist your help to be able to get things back on track so that we can both have a very positive experience. So it's addressing the elephant in the room. So again, it's going to be situational. There are some things that As an interviewer, I have just skipped to the final conclusion and said if an interviewee is being disrespectful, or if their behavior is such that it is determined that they are not going to be qualified to work on my team, then I will just say, I really appreciate your time. I'm going to the final question, which is, do you have anything that you would like to share with me before we terminate this interview? And then thank you for your time and meeting. And again, as an interviewer, if you have a person who is interviewing you that is being unprofessional and you can't resolve it by simply stating you're uncomfortable and what can we do to make this more positive, if they don't immediately address that, then you can just say, I don't think this is the position for me, but I really appreciate your time, and be polite, but end the interview. You're muted, Bobby.
Thank you. Sorry. I don't see any more questions, but there have been a couple of comments. Trish posted a link if you need to convert time zones. And then there was a suggestion that when you have water to use a clear glass so that it's less distracting. And then another suggestion came in about if you need to warm up your voice and exercise your jaw, do the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, ti, like in choir practice.
Excellent. Yes, anything you can do, and especially because a lot of us may not be talking to real people all the time. And so having an opportunity to be able to do that is something that you may need to do to make sure that you are speaking in your best possible voice when you are getting ready to do that.
Okay. And then did you want to wait until later to talk about backgrounds again, or?
Yes, I just have one more key point to make, and then let's take that opportunity.
Okay, thank you.
All right. So my last and most important part, I've said that a lot though, haven't I? Because there's a lot of important parts. But many of the hiring managers have said the same thing. What makes a candidate stand out is the questions that they ask. Questions will tell an employer that I am really interested in coming to work for you, that I'm interested in staying long-term with your company. And again, show that they are prepared and ready to go to work. I have been impressed with an entry-level employee who, after I asked my 10 standard questions, said, great, I now have 10 questions for you. And they were thoughtful questions, not just how much will I get paid and how much time off do I get. It was actual questions about how he could be successful for the job and how he could determine, is this a company I really want to come work for? And as I said, that just impressed the heck out of me. I would have hired him on the spot if our hiring practices allowed that. So having thoughtful questions will go a long way in really making you stand out in your interview. Now, if you can't think of questions, because it always breaks my heart when I do an interview and I ask if they have any questions and they say, no, you've covered everything. And I'm going, I know I didn't cover everything. So included in the handout that is available today is a list of 20 sample questions that you might want to ask your employer. And it is everything from asking about their personal style of management, if this happens to be the hiring manager that you're speaking with, to what does success look like in this role, to how does your corporation, company, organization communicate with the employees about what's happening within the organization. How are the internal communications? So these are the kind of thought-provoking questions that let someone know that you're not just interested in just the job, but being part of this new community. So those sample questions to get you started are included in the handout. And again, for those of you that are Toastmasters, you know it's always important to have a closing statement. Even if the closing statement is just showing the appreciation for the time of the interviewers, acknowledging your desire to be part of their team and to reiterate how much you're looking forward to helping them solve a problem or move their agenda forward or being part of the team. So having that all important closing statement leaves that lasting impression so that someone really wants to think about hiring you. So in summary, we've learned how to set the stage, how to make a great first impression, and most importantly, how leaving a lasting impression through your questions and your summary will really help you have a strong virtual interviewing session. And with that, I am open to questions, Bobby.
Okay, there's one that came in that says, what cues can we look for to know whether it is maybe not worth the time to ask questions? As in, perhaps you feel the interviewer is not interested in you.
So body language is a lot, but again, as hiring managers, a lot of times we have to really put our poker faces on, but there's usually tells. There's the looking at the watch, looking at the papers rather than wanting to continue that. And above all, you want to make sure you're respecting time. So asking, is there time for me to ask questions? And if they say no, then you know pretty much, And then perhaps even asking, can I send you my questions via email to get the answers? So there's still a way to sort of keep your foot in the door, but it could just be, again, remember the managers have a lot going on and they may just be ready to move on. They may have already made a decision, but I would still follow up with those questions via written communication.
Okay, another question came from Adrian. How do you navigate an interview where the panel has their cameras turned off?
Ooh, so I have not personally experienced that. That would just be, to me, that would just be weird.
I just had an interview where there were 4 people on the panel and only one of them had their camera turned on, but they were all asking me questions.
Wow. That is unusual. You just have to go with what's happening and focus on the person who has their camera on, and just assuming that those are the judgy people in the back that don't want to have their facial expressions, or they're creating their shopping lists or whatever they're doing. So focus on the individual. But yeah, again, as long as you're staring in the camera, those people, even with their cameras off, but that is bizarre, but here's all part of it. Welcome to the new virtual interview world. There's a lot of new norms.
Okay, and we got another question. Can you give us your best tips for looking at the camera and not at the people?
It is so hard. And when I watch this recording, I'm going to cringe because I keep glancing down at you guys. So it is hard. I've had people that have put giant arrows up there, smiley faces, something that points to that. I've even had people that have, covered up the screen. That sort of defeats the purpose. So the best tips I've been told is that when you're speaking, always speak to that light. But when the other person is speaking, obviously look down at their picture and then look back up when you are giving your response, look back down when they're speaking to you. So that's the best practical advice I can give you.
Okay, we had a quick question. Which software are you using for your your presentation tonight, Nancy?
So it's a PowerPoint slide. I have it also in PDF, and I believe we will be posting that version up there after this session.
And that's on the Showtime website?
Yes.
Public downloads?
Yes, thank you for that clarification, Bobby.
Okay. I don't see any other questions. We've got a few minutes left. So do you want to just, oh, Trish.
I have a silly tip for you.
Excellent.
If you want to break your habit of staring at the gallery versus staring at the camera, just start doing a PowerPoint presentation or whatever software you use, because in Zoom, once you share your presentation, it goes full screen and takes the gallery away from you. So you are forced to work with the camera at that point.
That is true. So I think, again, as we all become more experienced in this new virtual world, these are all questions that we're going, oh, I can't believe I asked that. But it is still new to all of us. I think a lot of hiring managers are still a little on the forgiving side. But that's, again, how you can stand out, is have these practice Zoom sessions. If you're not doing a lot of Zoom meetings on your own currently through your work or Toastmasters experience, set one up and invite a relative. And just get used to it. Practice, practice, practice.
Mm-hmm.
Tony, I see your hand.
Yes, one advice that I've heard is to put a photo of a loved one behind the camera, or a group of people that you love, you know, your family. That way you can concentrate on them. It's still difficult.
Yeah, anything that will draw your attention. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, and speaking of practice, we will obviously extend an invitation to all of you to come and practice with Showtime Toastmasters. We have converted to a 100% online club, and we intend to make it our mission to become masters of our virtual space. So don't hesitate to come drop in.
Okay, and I'll just jump in then with a quick report on comments about people's backgrounds. So a couple of them are maybe cluttered or have the ceiling fan or lights or something showing rather than having light in the face. As soon as we were talking about it, I noticed Peter had changed his to the Toastmasters background, which is a really good one. I think Christo.
Oh, he's
gone back to the bar now.
Okay.
Okay.
And Christo, you got the most votes for best background for an interview. And I'm inclined to agree because it looks like an office behind you. And if you're interviewing for a job, that's probably the impression you want to give people. And there were also some comments about other home offices that look pretty good. So, and then there was a comment about having, you know, a cloth background, something, you know, maybe make sure the color is good and positioned well. And I think that's it. So do we want to unmute and just have a discussion, or?
I would love to hear more people's ideas and experiences with virtual interviews.
Okay, there was a comment in from Nikki. So Nikki, would you like to share?
I had to figure out how to unmute first. You know, with Windows, you can resize your windows. So your Zoom does not have to take up your entire laptop. So you can shrink it down to literally look like a ribbon bar and place it at the very top of your screen, so that you can be looking at the people and you're still looking right by the camera.
But then I can't see my presentation.
Yeah, that's a great tip. And again, different people have different setups. I
right.
know I've seen people do the interviews and the Zoom on the phones. That personally makes me nervous because you can't do the gallery view if there are multiple things going on, and you just don't have the same level of controls that you would either on a tablet or on a desktop or laptop. So you have to know what is comfortable for you. And that's why experimenting, and I love those ideas so that we can see, try this, what works best for you. And that's load the software and play with it.
Okay, I don't see any more questions. Does anyone in the gallery want to bring something up? And we're at 7:27 right now, by the way.
3-minute warning.
Nancy, I just wanted to thank you for this presentation. It was very well done, and I've learned quite a bit. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Wendy. I've learned so much doing this research over the last few weeks. And as I said, talking to some hiring managers, bless their hearts, they're working hard. I will share one additional tip about resume that it wasn't really related to virtual interview because the implication is they've already seen it. But several hiring managers have told me they've got to go through a very large pile of resumes in a very short amount of time. So drop all those cover letters and those opening statements that say that you're highly motivated, goal-oriented, blah, blah, blah. And in those first 2 paragraphs, tell them specifically how your experience will help them meet their objectives. Because if you don't grab them in those first 2 minutes and tell them how you're going to be a valuable member of this team, they're not going to read the rest of the way of your resume. So change your resume for every interview opportunity. And that's all part of that research. Research the company, know what problem they're trying to solve, what the position is, because those managers are looking for people who can come in the door and help them do what they need to do to be successful.
All right. And in the final minute that we have, just a reminder, first off, let me thank Nancy for being our presenter tonight. Big jazz hands for Nancy. And jazz hands for yourselves as well for showing up and coming and supporting these workshops. As a reminder, tonight's workshop replay will be posted to our Showtime YouTube channel this Friday at 12:15 a.m. It's just an odd time. We like it. Find us on YouTube using Showtime Toastmasters AZ. For more information about Showtime Toastmasters and other upcoming workshops, please visit our website at showtime.toastmastersclubs.org. At this time, we're going to stop the recording for our open mic session that will be off the record. Thank you again, everyone, for being here.